For more than 2,000 years, scholars of antiquity have been puzzling over Plato's descriptions of the island nation and empire of Atlantis. Questions continue to fascinate researchers and explorers to this day. Was Atlantis a real place, or merely a literary device, a warning against pride and hubris? How could a civilization with the strength to maintain a maritime empire and to threaten Greece's security have simply disappeared? Why is there no mention of Atlantis in any ancient text other than Plato's? Where was this island capital located? And what could possibly obliterate this famed nation? As Plato asserted, within a night and a day, these questions have taken geological researchers all around the world, from Morocco to Indonesia, from Bolivia to the North Sea, to the Mediterranean, to the Sahara, or in search of Atlantis. Still, the majority of commentators regard Plato's description as nothing more than literary fiction, a salutary tale against national pride and military hubris. Plato certainly uses fiction in his writings. Nobody takes his dialogues as a verbatim recollection of an actual conversation, but Plato was real, and his subject, Socrates, was real. Plato's skill and passion in getting across Socrates' teaching is real, and in his dialogues, Plato certainly appeals to events in real-world history. Now, when we come to his long description of Atlantis in Timaeus and Critias, to me, it just doesn't bear the marks of pure fiction. Plato's references to higher beings or gods, and to beings who hybrids of gods and humans, are taken by some to be evidence that his Atlantic narratives are pure fiction, yet we find similar references in the texts of other ancient cultures who pepper their ancient histories with mention of similar entities. Many people think of Plato's description of Atlantis as if he's describing some kind of a utopia, but that's really not the case. Atlantis has an army. It goes to war. It was, he said, an enemy of prehistoric Athens, but that Athens defeated it. So it's not a utopia, and Plato's descriptions of it are so full of details that have nothing to do with advancing a story of national hubris or pride comes before fall, which is often how people interpret Atlantis when they want to say, it is a fiction. Now, Plato said that this information had been obtained from ancient Egyptian priests who had relayed the information to an ancient Greek legislator called Solon. And once again, that is a real person in real history. For me, those are all details that point to Atlantis being a real culture in real-world history. What really sparked the modern quest for Plato's Atlantis was the discovery in 1868 of the ancient and mythical city of Troy. For centuries, the academic consensus was that Troy was the literary creation of Homer, a Greek author who predated Plato by at least 500 years. In his work, the Iliad, Homer details the Trojan War and the 10-year siege on the city of Troy. Most scholars read these works as pure fiction, yet a few commentators quietly wondered if the fiction might be threaded through with real history of real places and real-world events. Plato's references to higher beings or gods, and to beings who are hybrids of gods and humans, are taken by some to be evidence that his Atlantic narratives are pure fiction. Yet similar references can be found in the texts of other historic cultures who pepper their ancient histories with mention of similar entities. The wide consensus that Troy was no more than fiction was dealt a fatal blow when in 1868 a 46-year-old German archaeologist, Heinrich Schliemann, discovered the mythical city of Troy. The way Heinrich Schliemann said about locating Troy was simply to make a checklist from all the geographic markers that Homer had placed in his narratives and use them as a guide. to get into the location. That's the discovery that's given energy to today's explorers. To do the same with Atlantis in Plato's writing, identify all the geographic and geological markers in Plato's text, and then follow the clues, and we'll meet in Atlantis. One of the most distinctive geological markers of Atlantis was the structure of the port city. Looking across Atlantis, from a height, one would see a central island, surrounded by concentric circles of land, separated by seawater. The circles of land were connected by a bridge, and the outer mode allowed a passage south to the Atlantic. Geologists have identified this as the natural shape of an island, formed by an undersea volcanic eruption, solidified and then modified by erosion. The remains of one such structure can be found in the Aegean Sea, at the Greek island of Santorini, home to the ancient Minoan culture. In 1913 and 1917, K. T. Frost and S. Bork proposed that the story of Atlantis and its catastrophic demise might relate to the ancient history of the Minoan civilization. On Santorini, archaeological searches in the region have demonstrated that the ancient Minoan culture was advanced in civil engineering, with plumbing, airflow management, multi-story buildings, and earthquake-resistant design. Santorini may well have been home to a maritime empire with the force to pit itself against ancient mainland Greece, which, according to Plato, was exactly what Atlantis did. Historically, Santorini was indeed wiped out by a single major cataclysm of volcanic eruption. In the second millennium BCE, could Santorini have been the inspiration behind Plato's Atlantis? Santorini was a developed maritime power. The remaining built structures of the city of Akrotiri on Santorini reveal a degree of sophistication that may well have rivaled the civic environment of pre-ancient Athens. However, it is difficult to correlate the geological clues that Plato claimed for Atlantis. The concentric circles of the Atlantean capital cannot be identified. Crete, rather than Santorini, was the local center of power. Santorini did not sink under the waves of the Atlantic. It was buried in the Aegean Sea by a volcanic eruption. Furthermore, Santorini's timeline does not match the dates that Plato claimed for Atlantis. Neither is it opposite the location or most universally accepted for the Pillars of Hercules. One of the key geographic markers that Plato gave was that he placed Atlantis, which, with the capital city and associated islands, he said was a landmass, a little larger than modern-day Libya. And he placed it beyond and opposite the Pillars of Hercules. Across from the Pillars of Hercules, he said, or Heracles, that the ancient Greeks would say now those pillars were understood by the ancient Greeks to refer to the two towering promontories that flank the entrance to the Strait of Gibraltar. And Greek legend tells the story of Heracles marking the edge, the western edge of the known world. Beyond that was the unknown world, and that would place Atlantis not in Santorini, but somewhere to the west in the North Atlantic, to the west of Spain and northwest Africa. But how far west evidences of ancient cities lost in the terrain. And under the coastal waters of South America have LED, some to locate Atlantis in modern-day Amazonia, Bolivia, or off the coast of Cuba. But for an ancient maritime people to advance a naval attack on Athens from Cuba or Bolivia would not appear in the least feasible. Cuba is one of a number of locations on planet Earth whose coastal waters have submerged the cities of a previous culture. The island of Malta famously has these deep tracks embedded in stone that lead something onto land that is now thousands of feet underwater. off the coast of Yonaguni-jima in Japan and in the Gulf of Cambay, off the coast of India under 25 to 36 meters of water. Scientists have discovered the remains of streetscapes and cityscapes that would have been above sea level no more recently than 10,000 years ago. So there's no shortage of evidence for a civilization long predating our own. So while these places are fascinating and certainly important because it tells us there's a huge gap in our knowledge of our ancestry in our ancient past, they're not Plato's Atlantis, they're just in the wrong place. Plato's geographic clues have led some explorers to the coastal regions of Spain and northwest Africa. But what did the northwest African coastline look like 11.5 millennia ago at the time of Atlantis? What tectonic shifts might have altered the lie of the land and the perimeter of the oceans? Plato's description of an earthquake and a tsunami certainly hint at a cataclysm of global proportions viewed from space. The western coast of Mauritania bears the unmistakable scars of an immense deluge. A wash of sand and silt has immersed a huge section of land spanning from the North Atlantic to the interior of what is now the Sahara Desert land that is now well above sea level was once underwater. Accordingly, the desert floor is scattered with the remains of marine animals. The skeletons and shells are testament to the land's oceanic past year. In 2008, Natalis Rosen and George S. Alexander began to investigate an anomaly in the Mauritanian landscape. A structure within the Eye of Africa, the Recat structure, concentric rims of land, alternating with deep troughs, correspond with the unusual shape of Atlantis, with the land lower or the sea level higher. The correlations with Atlantis become clearer. Other clues in Plato's text find correlations here: the white, red, and black stone, springs of salt water and one of fresh water, the preponderance of elephant, remains, mountains, rivers, and a plateau to the north, a landlock of prehistoric mud, silt in sand between the structure and the waters of the Atlantic Rosen. And Alexander show that the scale of the recon structure corresponds with the measurements Plato gave for the Atlantean capital. They show that the outer ring has a diameter of 23.5 kilometers. This matches the 127 stadia of Plato's texts. Critics suggest that this measurement doesn't take account of the full extent of the rehab structure, which appears to be significantly larger, 35 to 50 kilometers. Yet the structure is rimmed by mountains on the north side, landlocked by morass of sand and silt. Just as Plato described, it's abutted by plateau and extends to what may have been a passageway to the sea. All powerful correlations, but is Mauritania the right location? Plato's phrase, beyond the pillars of Heracles, suggests a location beyond the known world. Even an underwater Mauritania would have been immediately adjacent to the northwest African mainland. Furthermore, the orientation of the recap structure is not to the north and south, as Plato said, but to the southwest, and the abutting plain doesn't match the details given by Plato. The area of ancient mud, silt, in sand pose no imaginable obstacle to the navigability of the region. At the time of Plato, contrary to his claims about the aftermath of Atlantis, and if the rehab structure is the remnant of Atlantis, where are the remains of the street systems and megalithic structures? Where is the evidence that an advanced civilization ever called this place home under the coastal waters of Cuba, Malta, the Gulf of Cambay? The remains of the cities are still there. Streets, steps, buildings, temples, all present and visible. Even after 10,000 years under the sea, wouldn't something similar remain, even if flattened and scattered around the recat's structure? When we look at the timing of the demise of this previous civilization, of which Plato's Atlantis, if it existed, was a part, it corresponds with the timing of the most recent extinction-level event on planet Earth that we know of. Pioneering scientists like Richard Feiston of the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and Albert Goodyear of the University of Southern Carolina, James Kennett at the University of California really stuck their neck out with this thesis, but it's now part of a growing scientific consensus that our planet was indeed impacted by the exploding fragments of a massive asteroid which 1,800 years ago obliterated the Clovis civilization on North America. It extincted 70% of that continent's megafauna. It would have triggered sky fires and tsunamis around the world, blanketing the planet in a pool of dust and ash and soot. What's known as the Clovis Comet plunged the northern half of planet Earth back into an ice age even more severe than the one we've just been emerging from. And at that time, the future of humanity itself would have hung in the balance. So it isn't hard to conceive of an island nation experiencing seismic disturbances and then disappearing under the waves, just as Plato said of Atlantis. The impact of the Clovis Comet, its fragments, and the planetary changes that followed give an explanation of why Coastal City is adjacent to Cuba, Malta, Japan, India, and now, under up to 36 meters of seawater, we call this moment the Younger, Driest Cold period. A period whose effects continued until 11,600 years ago. A massive meteorite crater beneath the ice fields of Greenland's Hiawatha Glacier measures 31 kilometers in diameter and may correspond with the timing of the Younger Dryas extinctions of megafauna included woolly rhinos and mammoths, mastodons, and saber-toothed tigers in North America and Europe, the giant sloth in South America, and enormous versions of buffalo, zebra, and wildebeest on the African subcontinent. Might the recon structure correspond with Plato's Atlantis, or does its orientation and position misalign with Plato's description? Might his burial in salt and ocean sand have all been part of a wider cataclysm triggered by the Clovis Comet? Were the absence of megalithic structures and other questions unanswered? One has to ask, is it even in the right location? Plato's phrase, placing Atlantis beyond the Pillars of Heracles, would more probably locate Atlantis somewhere in the mid-North Atlantic. Well, what has been found there that might give evidence that Atlantis was a real place? And why does it matter if we now have evidence of ancient cities under seawater all around the world? And it's incontrovertible that there was a previous civilization, previous cultures that we really don't know very much about. If we've got all that to explore, then why is Plato's forgotten city still important? Why does it matter to people? And if its only historical reference is to be found in Plato's writings, how important can it be? What exactly is a stake? Richard Frein, professor of archaeology at the University of Hartford, has been investigating archaeological sites in southern Spain that point to a culture with a memory of Atlantis, using technology that reads soil conductivity. Professor Frein's archaeological team has located a site in Doñana in western Spain, a region of mudflats, the aftermath of a prehistoric inundation. Underneath the mudflats, the team's technology revealed patterns strongly suggesting a circular, buried structure, the signatures of ancient walls deep beneath the soil. A curious methane layer in the subsoil hints at a huge deposit of animal and plant life buried and sealed in a single catastrophic event, yet probing further under the mudflats poses an extreme technical challenge while we await further investigation of Doniana. Spanish archaeologists have been bringing to light a unique structure 200 kilometers from the coast at a place called Canceruano. The structure appears to serve as some kind of shrine or memorial to commemorate the ancient people's cultural heritage. Professor Freund interprets the structure as the representation and miniature of an ancient city. Located in the center of the miniature city is what appears to be a temple, vestiges of gold, silver, and bronze found within its walls. Plato stated that Atlantis had an industry in mining and refining. 4 valuable metals exquisitely carved into the temple floor at Canceruano is a unique symbol from ancient Egyptian culture, and it's the symbol of the science of refining metals. What that tells us is that the culture being memorialized at Canceruano was built on the mining and refining of metals. What Plato said about Atlantis. Now, if that seems circumstantial, there's another carving at Cantial Romano that makes the connection with Atlantis even stronger. Right at the threshold of the ancient temple is a large stone. Steely carved into the stone is the image of a warrior bearing an enormous metal sword, and he's guarding what looks to me like a map of Plato's Atlantis. Maybe Mauritania merits further investigation. Maybe the coast of southern Spain. Plato's phrase, across from the Pillars of Heracles, could place Atlantis further out into the Atlantic, yet close enough to mount a naval attack on prehistoric Athens. But why does it matter? Why are so many researchers investing great sums of money? And indeed, there are lifetimes looking for a place that a great many scholars would claim is pure fiction. In 2005, on the island of Milos, researchers gathered from around the world to discuss the questions surrounding the search for Atlantis. The conference identified 24 checkpoints from the writing of Plato criteria that would have to be fulfilled by any geographical candidate claiming to be the remains of Atlantis in the 150 years since the modern search for Atlantis was kicked off by Heinrich Schliemann's discovery of Troy. No geographical candidate has been identified that comes close to ticking those 24 checkpoints. We found buried and underwater cities and habitations in the Amazon jungle in the North Sea, off the coast of Cuba, Malta, Japan, India. What's so important then about taking Plato's lost city out of the fiction basket and saying that it was real when we have so many other ancient cities and cultures to explore? Well, for me, the significance of finding Atlantis would be in adding weight to the other claims that Plato makes. Claims that, if we put them into the fiction basket, really become kind of irrelevant. But if they're real, Plato's claims are life-changing. So into Myus and Critias, which is the work where Atlantis makes its appearance. What kind of writing are we dealing with? What kind of information does Plato claim to be passing on to us? Well, Plato identifies 3 sources of information. The first one is logic applied to things we can all observe. We might call it science. Plato called it philosophy, but essentially it's logic applied to observation. It's on that basis that Plato makes the following conclusions in today's language. We would call it the holographic universe, the conscious universe, the belief that the material universe is the expression or fractalization of the primordial field of intelligence and consciousness, that you and I existed as beings of light or spirit before we came into this life as human beings, and that our learning here is really remembering what we knew before. It's also on this basis that Plato concludes that we're here to learn how to do consciousness, love, harmony, and intelligence as a free society of individuals, exercising free choice. Plato reaches all those conclusions from logic, apply to things we all observe. His second source of information was what we would call an altered state of consciousness, a personal experience of another dimension through the ingestion of an ancient Greek psychedelic called kaision, part of what was known as the Elastinian mysteries. Out of that experience, Plato deepens his view that we each are spiritual beings going through a human experience in order to learn love and wisdom. And it's from that source he teaches that our biggest obstacle to enjoying this life and making that journey, learning those lessons, is fear, and fear of death. In particular, he teaches that our challenge is to shake off our heavier emotions. Emotions that detract from a good human experience: anger, rage, fear, frustration, hatred, resentment, unforgiveness. We have to learn how to deal with that and shake it off, and he teaches that at death our consciousness goes on. But before returning to our original glory and oneness, we have to process that heavier stuff, the stuff that's weighed us down. He teaches that in death we're met by spirit beings, whether by loving ancestors, those who've gone before us, or by interdimensional beings. Did you know that Plato taught this, who were deeply involved in the learnings of the human experience now from here or the next source of information? Plato has also concluded that there are people similar to us who live on islands in the sky. They're more intelligent than us. They longer live than us, and with an advanced knowledge of the cosmos, he also taught the powerful beings. He didn't know what they were. He just called them. Children of God had intervened in the very evolution of Homo sapiens as an intelligent and conscious species. He also taught that planet Earth experiences periodic extinction-level events that basically take human civilization back to virtual zero. And everything has to reset and re-establish itself. And he says, these are things I can't prove, but that I have come to believe, things I have concluded. Plato's third source of information is a canon of ancient Egyptian priestly knowledge, which he claims was passed on to a real figure in Greek history called Solon, a political figure legislator. And this information, he said, had been curated by the Egyptian priesthood of antiquity, but that this information predated even that, and it's from that source that Plato tells us of Atlantis, a previous civilization, not a utopia, but an advanced military empire wiped off the face of the earth by what we can only describe as a planetary cataclysm. If Plato is proven right about that, then all his other claims, and you see how far-reaching they are suddenly given far greater weight. But is there another explanation? Is it possible that Plato's narrative of Atlantis is a fusion of fact and fiction, an interweaving of a moral lesson with details inspired by real history? I think people get confused by the fact that Plato uses fiction in his teaching. No one reads Thomas and Critias as if it's a word-for-word recollection of a real conversation. But if I can illustrate with one of my books about 20 years ago, I wrote a book called My Dinner with Anton. And it's a conversation between two people I made up. One is a 250-year-old monk called Anton, fictional, and a fictionalized version of myself again. Fiction, we didn't meet for dinner, and we didn't have a conversation. It's fiction, but the conversation is about a real historical person, Seraphim of Sarav, and it's full of quotes from real historical conversations. So the whole thing is written to convey an aspect of Seraphim's teaching, and it's all my own work. It's written really to convey my own thinking at the same time. What I have learned from Seraphim. So my dinner with Anton is all fiction. It's all true. It quotes a real historical figure and real conversations. It's all seraphims, teaching, and it's all pause thinking. The conversation never happened, but it relays real history now, of course. 20 years ago, I thought I was a genius thinking this up. But of course, there's nothing new under the sun. I'd only reinvented the wheel. Countless writers through the ages have written dialogues with layers just like that. And in his dialogues, that's exactly what Plato does. So in Thomas and Critias, where Plato talks about Atlantis, it's all fiction. It's all written to convey Socrates' real historic teaching. So it's all Socrates. These are Plato's beliefs. So it's all Plato. He quotes a real historical figure. The conversation never happened, but it's entirely possible that it relays real history. So if it turns out that Plato's claims about history are real, if we find Atlantis, what else in his teaching might we take out of the pure fiction basket and listen to a little different? What about Plato's claims about human origins? The origins of the universe as a unified field of consciousness and intelligence and love. What do we do with that? Or his teaching that the origins of Homo sapiens included this external intervention in our evolution by another species, which was an intervention to heighten our intelligence and consciousness. Do we begin to take that more seriously? Or what about Plato's claims about people similar to us, more intelligent than us, more advanced, longer lived, with spacefaring capacities? What do we do with that? What do we do with Plato's claims about our consciousness surviving death and carrying the lessons of this life? Do we take that more seriously? Or Plato's claim that around every 5,000 years, human civilization is taken down to virtual zero and reset by some planetary catastrophe? What she said was triggered by the movements of space, objects, planets, and asteroids. Are we ready now to do business with that? And what do we do with Plato's claims? An altered state of consciousness can actually provide information to us. I can help us shake off the anxiety that so detracts from our enjoyment of life. Is that a lesson that we're finally prepared to take seriously and not feel threatened by? What about his claim that it brings us real information about other dimensions? I think we rob ourselves when we dismiss Plato as fiction. I want to know the truth of what he's saying. And personally, I don't need Atlantis to be found to find truth in what he's saying. No one would deny that Plato is the most important thinker in the history of Western thought. The British mathematician and philosopher Alfred Whitehead famously described all European philosophy as no more than a series of footnotes to Plato. That's how important he is. And in my view, we don't need to read Plato's Atlantis narrative in a fundamentalist way as word for word history to take Plato seriously. But if we were to establish the existence of Atlantis and locate its remains, what an incredible look at this that would supply to all of Plato's claims. Thank you for watching The Fifth Kind. We hope you enjoyed this thought-provoking program. Subscribe and click on the bell for notifications so that you never miss when new videos are posted. Please like and share this video and help make sure this type of content stays around and is available for others who may be seeking it. Check out our official website at www.thefifthkind.com, where you can sign up to receive our latest newsletters, stories, and select featured content that is only available on alternative platforms. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.